Picture a room the size of a generous wardrobe. Now pack it with 7 men who haven't properly bathed in 4 months. Add the smell of rotting flesh, unwashed wool soaked through with salt water, and a wooden bucket that hasn't been emptied since sometime before Tuesday. Put this room at the very bottom of a wooden ship, below the waterline, below the gun decks, below everything, in a place where natural light has never once visited and almost certainly never will. Hang a single tallow candle from a hook in the ceiling, and watch it swing with every heave and roll of the sea. That's the sick berth of a British Royal Navy warship, circa 1744. And I need you to understand something right now, before we go any further. This is the medical facility. This is where you go to get better. There's a man in there right now who's been bleeding from his gums for 3 weeks. There's another who hasn't kept a meal down in 9 days. There's a third with a wound on his leg that started as a rope burn and has since developed a smell that the other patients describe very accurately as like a dead dog in July. The surgeon is a 53-year-old man named Mr. Samuel Dodd, who trained as a barber surgeon's apprentice in Bristol in 1711, spent 8 years with the army in Flanders, and is missing the ring finger and the little finger of his left hand due to, and this is actually in his naval record, a surgical procedure improperly supervised. He amputates those same fingers from other men with the same calm he'd used to eat his breakfast. His breakfast, by the way, is weevil-riddled hardtack and whatever's left of last night's salt pork. Same as yours, because you're not a sailor, you're not a marine, you're not even really a surgeon's assistant in the traditional sense. You're a loblolly boy, which sounds like something a children's author might invent. It isn't. So, I make these history stories and I genuinely don't know if you're falling asleep to them or if you're the kind of person who just enjoys hearing about men dying of scurvy in the dark while a ship rolls through the North Atlantic in November. Honestly, both groups are welcome here. No judgment. If you want to subscribe, subscribe. Get comfortable. We're going below decks. Here we go. Your name is Thomas Hewitt. You're 17 years old, and you've been on this ship for 6 weeks, and you spent most of those 6 weeks wishing you were dead. Not dramatically. Not in the way people say it when they mean they're embarrassed. You actually, genuinely, in a very practical way, have spent significant portions of your time aboard HMS Resolute, calculating whether dying would be worse than this. The conclusion you keep arriving at is, it depends on how you die. If it's quick, dying might actually be preferable. You come from Somerset, from a village called Dulverton, tucked into the edge of Exmoor, where the hills are green and soft and the air smells of heather and rain and the occasional sheep. Your father was a yeoman farmer who died of a lung complaint when you were 15, leaving your mother, 2 sisters, and you with a mortgaged farm and a very optimistic attitude toward the future. The farm went to creditors, your mother went to live with your aunt in Bridgewater, your sisters went with her. And you, Thomas Hewitt, in a decision that seemed considerably more reasonable at the time than it does now, volunteered for the Royal Navy. The recruiting sergeant in Taunton was a red-faced man with excellent posture and a talent for storytelling. He described the Navy as adventure, income, and the opportunity to see the wider world. He mentioned prize money. He mentioned the glory of service to King George II. He did not mention the smell. He did not mention the smell at all. Your eyes opened to darkness. For a moment, maybe half a second, maybe less. You don't know where you are. Then the ship moves. That pitch and roll, that gentle, horrible lurch beneath you, reminds your body of exactly where you are before your brain has finished loading. The hammock sways, the rope creaks, the sounds press in from every direction at once. The Resolute is never silent, not even at 2 a.m, not even in calm seas, not even when the night watch is the only souls on deck above you. The ship is always talking. The hull groans against the pressure of the water. The rigging hums. Somewhere above you, a hatch is banging slightly in a rhythm that's just irregular, enough to prevent you from tuning it out. Below you, and when I say below you, I mean directly below the boards on which your hammock is strung, the bilge breathes. The bilge is the bottom of the ship, where all the water that leaks in through the hull collects, mixes with everything that's fallen through the cracks over the years, and ferments into something that smells like the inside of a very old boot that's been left at the bottom of a well. This smell rises through the planking at all hours. You have been sleeping approximately 2 feet above the bilge for 6 weeks. You no longer notice it the way you used to. This is both an adaptation and a loss. The other smell comes from the sick berth that you still notice. The sick berth is 7 feet aft of where your hammock hangs. It's a partitioned section of the orlop deck, the lowest deck, the one that sits below the waterline where the ship's timbers are thickest and the darkness is most complete. During a battle, this is where the wounded are brought. During the endless grey stretches between battles, and the Resolute has not yet been in a battle, which is both a relief and a kind of frustration that you can't quite explain. The sick berth is where the just generally ill go to suffer with slightly more official supervision. Right now there are 8 men in it. You can hear 2 of them from where you're lying. One is coughing. It's been going on since before you fell asleep last night. A deep wet cough that hitches and stops and then starts again, like a cart with a broken wheel trying to make progress uphill. The other is making a lower sound, almost not a sound at all, more of a sustained exhalation of someone who is enduring something and has decided that making noise about it accomplishes nothing. That second man is John Pierce. John Pierce is 26 years old and he is a topman, which means his job is to climb the rigging, the ropes and spars high up the mast, in all weather, including weather that a sensible person on land would describe as a disaster. He was doing exactly this 3 weeks ago in a squall off Cape Finisterre, when the line he was holding gave way and he fell. He fell 11 feet onto a yard arm, hit it with his left leg, and then fell another 9 feet to the deck. The leg is broken in 2 places. One of those places, Mr. Dodd says, is not good. The bone has done something it shouldn't, and the muscle around it is doing something muscles aren't supposed to do. It smells like the wound on the other man's arm, except worse. Mr. Dodd checks it every morning and says nothing, which you've learned to recognise as bad. John Pierce doesn't complain. He makes that low sound, that contained exhale, and he looks at the ceiling, and he doesn't complain. He's from Norfolk. He joined the Navy at 14. He's been at sea for 12 years. You suspect he's forgotten what complaining is supposed to accomplish. You lie in your hammock in the dark and listen to the ship breathe and think about getting up. You have to get up. Your morning begins before the watch changes, before the cook starts the coppers for the morning's burgoo, before almost everything except the helmsman and the lookout and whatever poor soul is senior on the night watch. You get up because the sick need to be tended before the day officially starts, and Mr. Dodd is many things, but an early riser is not one of them. You swing your legs out of the hammock and the cold hits you. It is always cold on the orlop deck. The boards are cold. The air is cold with a particular damp quality, a coldness that has been marinating in salt water and bilge for so long that it's become something more than mere cold. It's a presence, a texture, something that presses against your skin through your shirt and makes you understand on a cellular level why men drink as much as they do. Your feet hit the planking, cold, rough, slightly wet, which is always slightly wet from condensation and from whatever comes up between the boards when the sea is rough. You're wearing your shirt and your breeches because you slept in them. This is normal. This is what everyone does. Undressing to sleep is a luxury that requires a level of warmth this ship has never offered and probably never will. Privacy is another luxury. In the orlop, 14 men sleep within 15 feet of each other. You know the rhythm of every man's breathing. You know who grinds his teeth and who talks in his sleep. Midshipman Richards, who is 16 and dreams about his mother, which might be the saddest thing on this ship, and there is considerable competition for that title. You grab your coat from where it's hanging on the hook above your hammock, pull it on. The wool is rough and smells of salt and something biological you've decided not to identify. It's the warmth that matters. The coat does its work. You button it with fingers still half asleep. Then you go to work. The sick berth at 5 in the morning in November on the North Atlantic is not a place that prepares you for the day ahead. It prepares you for everything else about life, though. Every difficulty you will ever face on dry land, every hard conversation, every long day, every moment where you're not sure you can keep going, you will measure against this. You will think, at least I'm not in the sick berth of HMS Resolute in the dark before dawn, with 8 suffering men and a candle that keeps trying to go out. You duck through the partition. The smell changes immediately. It's not one smell. I want you to understand this. It's not a single thing you can identify and categorize and hold at arm's length. It's layers. It's a geological record of human suffering compressed into a space approximately 12 feet by 9. First, the bilge beneath. Always there, foundational, the base note everything else sits on. Salt and rot and wet wood and something vaguely fermented. Second, the bodies themselves. 8 men who have not bathed in. You've stopped counting the weeks for some of them, and who are too sick to clean themselves properly, lying in canvas hammocks or on wooden berths with thin straw mattresses, sweating through fevers or shivering through chills or both, in the way that illness doesn't seem to care about logical consistency. Third, the specific smell of infected wounds. If you haven't smelled an infected wound before, there isn't a clean comparison. It's sweet in a way that has no right to be sweet. It's warm. It has a thickness to it that you can feel in the back of your throat, and the first time you smelled it, you were sick over the side of the ship. And Mr. Dodd watched you do it and said nothing, and that was actually the kindest thing he's done since you arrived. 4. The medicines. Mr. Dodd's medicine chest lives in the dispensary, which is a cupboard really, but calling it a dispensary makes it sound like a place where medicine happens, which it occasionally does. The medicines have their own smell. The mercury compounds, which are used for several things, including things no one discusses politely. The laudanum, which is opium dissolved in alcohol, and which smells like the best and worst thing simultaneously. The vinegar they use to clean wounds and surfaces. The camphor. The dried herbs in their little packets that Mr. Dodd sometimes burns. Less because he believes in their efficacy, and more because they cover the other smells briefly. And underneath all of it, faint but unmistakable, blood. You stop at the first berth. Old Silas. Silas Marsh is 61 years old, which on a Royal Navy ship in 1744 makes him ancient. He should not, by any right, still be at sea. He should be somewhere on dry land, in a garden, growing vegetables and occasionally complaining about his knees. Instead, he's here, on the orlop of the Resolute, because the Navy is where Silas has been for 40 years, and the Navy is all Silas knows. He has scurvy. You've been learning about scurvy since you came aboard, mostly by watching it happen to the men around you. It's not a dramatic disease, not in the way you might imagine. It's slow, incremental. It creeps up on a man over weeks, months, until suddenly it seems to arrive all at once. The gums go first. They swell and darken and start to bleed, so that a man wakes up in the morning with blood on his lips from nothing at all. Then the joints start to ache. Old wounds. Wounds from years ago. Wounds a man thought were healed. They start to reopen. The body is unravelling something it built, pulling back the threads. Silas's gums have been bleeding for 6 weeks. His left ankle, which he broke in a fall from a mast in 1729, and which healed badly, has swollen to twice its normal size. There are spots on his skin, dark purple like bruises that appeared without impact. He is awake when you arrive. He's usually awake. "Morning, boy," he says. His voice is rough from the night. "Morning, Silas. How are we?" He opens his mouth and shows you his gums. This is his version of an answer. They're worse than yesterday. The colour has deepened at the edges, a dark red purple that you've learned to watch with a specific kind of dread. "Same question every morning," he says. "Same gums every morning." You dip a cloth in the basin of water. Fresh water, technically, though fresh is relative. It's been in the casks for 3 months, and has developed a taste that a generous person might describe as earthy, and press it gently against his mouth. He accepts this without protest. This is the treatment for scurvy on a ship like this. Keep the gums clean, keep the man comfortable, keep giving him whatever can be spared from the stores that isn't salt meat and hardtack, and wait. Wait for what exactly? For lemon juice, says Mr. Dodd, though he says it the way a man says something he knows to be true but cannot yet prove to everyone's satisfaction. There's a Scottish naval surgeon named Lind, Dr. James Lind of Edinburgh, who published something recently. 1753, he said. No, wait, it's 1744 now, so that hasn't happened yet, but the principle is already circulating among surgeons who pay attention. Citrus fruit, lemon juice. Something in it prevents scurvy, cures it even, though nobody knows what or why. The trouble is that lemon juice doesn't keep on ships, not for months at sea, not in the quantities you'd need. So Silas bleeds. "Rations yesterday," Silas says while you work on his gums. "Purser shorted us again, swear he did." "Go back to sleep, Silas." "I'm not asleep, I'm resting my bones." "Rest them quietly." He makes a sound that's almost a laugh. It's the closest he gets these days. You move down the row. There's a rhythm to the morning rounds, and you learned it by being corrected. Mr. Dodd is precise about the order of things. Not because he's particularly formal, he's not. He swears with a creativity that would impress a dockside tavern keeper, but because he believes that routine in medicine is what separates controlled suffering from chaos. His words. You wrote them down in the log because they seemed like something that should be recorded. First, you check the critical patients, the ones whose status changes overnight. The ones where morning light, or in the absence of morning light on the orlop, the first swing of the lantern across their faces tells you something the evening couldn't. Second, you change dressings on the wounds that need changing. Bandages left too long become problems. Bandages changed correctly stay useful for a day or two. You're learning to tell the difference by smell and texture, which is information your nose did not sign up for but is now receiving regardless. Third, the loblolly. That's where the name comes from. Loblolly is a kind of thick oatmeal gruel, cooked soft enough that men with bleeding gums and no strength can swallow it. You carry it from the cook's domain, down through the ship to the sick berth. It's your primary task, your official function, and the thing that gives you your title. You are the boy who carries the gruel for the sick. You are the loblolly boy. It's not as simple as it sounds. The cook, a man named Biggs, who lost his right arm below the elbow at the Battle of Toulon in 1744. Yes, very recently. Yes, this is a navy where injured men become the cook. Biggs makes the loblolly to Mr. Dodd's specifications, which means Biggs and Mr. Dodd argue every morning about those specifications, and you get to stand between them while this happens. Less salt, Mr. Dodd says. Their gums can't take it. It needs salt or it's just hot water with pretensions, Biggs says. It's medicine, not a dinner party. I'm a cook. I will not serve something that tastes like bilge water heated up and called food. I have standards. This from a man who routinely serves hardtack with visible weevils in it. Biggs has a complicated relationship with standards, but you carry the gruel down to the sick berth every morning, and you spoon it into the men who can't feed themselves, and you coax it into the ones who've stopped wanting to eat. And some mornings that feels like the most important thing happening on this entire ship. John Pierce looks worse this morning. You stand at the end of his berth and look at his leg and feel something cold in the centre of your chest that has nothing to do with temperature. The leg is wrapped in linen that Mr. Dodd changed yesterday afternoon. The linen, overnight, has gone from white to a yellow-green around the area of the break. The smell from it, that specific sweet rot smell, is stronger than it was last night. Pierce is looking at the ceiling. He knows you're there. He doesn't acknowledge it immediately, the way men in serious pain sometimes focus on a single fixed point, as though releasing it would release everything else. "Tom," he says finally. "John, what's the look on your face about?" "No look." "You've got a look. I've spent 12 years reading the faces of men who knew things I didn't. What's the look about?" You don't answer that. You go to the medicine chest and come back with fresh linen and the pot of pitch and turpentine salve that Mr. Dodd uses on infected wounds, which is, by the standards of 1744, a reasonable if limited intervention. "Going to need to dress it again," you say. "It's worse." Not a question. "Mr. Dodd will look at it this morning." "Is it coming off?" You stop. Your hands stop. The question sits in the air between you. Taking off a limb, amputation, is not, in 1744, the desperate last resort it might sound like from the outside. It's actually, terribly often the recommended intervention. Gangrene, the specific thing that happens to infected wounds when they progress, moves through a limb and then into the body. An infected limb that's taken off early gives a man a chance. An infected limb left to progress does not give him anything except a worse death. Mr. Dodd has amputated. You've seen it. You've held men down for it, which is the other part of your job that no one mentioned in Taunton. There's no anesthesia. There's rum, sometimes a lot of rum, and there's leather to bite down on, and there's the surgeon going as fast as he possibly can because speed is the mercy available, and there's you and whoever else is strong enough holding the man still. You've been on the ship 6 weeks. You've helped with 2 amputations. You've handed Mr. Dodd the tools he asked for, in the order he asked for them, without dropping anything, without looking away. That second part, not looking away, was a deliberate decision you made after the first time, when you looked away and then couldn't find your footing for days afterward. Mr. Dodd makes those decisions, you say. Pierce nods. He's quiet for a moment. The ship rolls gently, and the lantern swings, and the shadows move. 12 years, Tom, he says. I've been at sea 12 years. I know. First time I ever had to lie still this long. A pause. I don't care for it. No. If it comes off, he says, his voice completely level, completely controlled. The voice of a man who has decided to be practical about this. What does a one-legged sailor do? You don't have an answer for that either. You tie off the fresh dressing as gently as you can. He doesn't make a sound. Greenwich, you say, finally. The Naval Hospital at Greenwich, at the edge of London, where old sailors go and broken sailors, and men who can no longer serve at sea, but whom the Navy has decided to care for. You've heard about it. You've never seen it. Greenwich, he repeats, tries the word out. That's a place for old men. It's a place for men who've earned it. He looks at the ceiling again. The conversation is over. Mr. Samuel Dodd arrives at 6 o'clock in the morning, precisely, every morning. He doesn't announce himself. He just appears in the doorway of the sick berth, already wearing his coat, already carrying his notebook, already with the expression of a man who has catalogued all available problems and is prepared to address them in order of severity. He's a large man, not tall but broad, with the kind of density that suggests he started as a bigger man and compressed over time. His hair is grey-brown and worn in a queue under a hat that has seen considerably better decades. His face looks like a map of everything that's happened to it, which is considerable. He has been at sea in various capacities since 1714. He has been at the Battle of Cape Passaro in 1718. He has been in the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, the North Atlantic. He has seen, by his own count, 47 men die of things he couldn't prevent and 11 die of things he probably could have if he'd known differently. That last number clearly bothers him in a way he doesn't discuss. Boy, he says, which is what he calls you. Sir, Marsh. Gums are worse. He nods, goes to. Silas performs his own examination. His hands are quick and precise, even the one with the missing fingers. The absence has become just part of how he works, an adjustment so practiced it's invisible. Pierce. The dressing was changed, I think. I know what you think. He's already at Pierce's berth, already unwrapping what you just wrapped. He looks at the leg for a long moment. Pierce looks at the ceiling. The silence in the sick berth at that moment is a particular kind of silence, the kind where everyone is listening even though no one wants to hear. Mr. Dodd wraps it back up, stands, makes a note in his book. I'll speak with the captain, he says. Pierce closes his eyes. That's all. That's the entire announcement. I'll speak with the captain. On a Navy ship in 1744, the captain's permission is required for major surgical procedures. It's a bureaucratic reality that sits on top of medical reality in a way that a man lying in a berth with a gangrenous leg has no choice but to accept. Mr. Dodd moves to the next patient. You follow. You hand him things when he reaches for them. You write what he dictates in the patient log. You are the assistant to medicine, which is the actual level of qualification you have on this ship. After rounds, he stops at the doorway and looks back at the sick berth. All 8 men, lying or sitting in various states of suffering. The candle is burned low. You'll need to replace it from the store before the morning is much older. Replace the candle, he says. Yes, sir. And get yourself something to eat. This is genuinely the most personal thing he's ever said to you. You stand there for a moment, slightly surprised. He's already gone. The Resolute is a 64-gun ship of the line. She was built at Chatham in 1737, launched in front of a crowd that cheered because crowds cheer at ship launchings even when they have no particular connection to the ship. She's 160 feet long at the gun deck, 44 feet in the beam, and she draws about 18 feet of water when loaded. She carries a crew of approximately 500 men, though approximately is doing a lot of work there. The Navy's arithmetic about how many men are on any given ship involves optimism about desertion and disease rates that rarely survives contact with reality. Of those 500 men, you exist at approximately the lowest rung that still has a rung below it. You're not quite a sailor, not yet. You're not an officer, the idea would be comic. You're not a marine, not a gun crew member, not a topman, not a carpenter's mate, not a purser's clerk, not a midshipman. You're the surgeon's loblolly boy, which means you belong to the sick berth, and the sick berth belongs, in the ship's hierarchy, to a kind of administrative grey area between the warrant officers and the lower deck. This means you can go almost anywhere and are fully welcomed nowhere. You eat with the other servants and junior ratings. You sleep on the orlop. You have no particular mess of your own, no gang of men who automatically look out for you. What you have is Mr. Dodd's implicit protection. Nobody troubles the surgeon's assistant because nobody wants to be on the wrong side of the surgeon, and the social invisibility of someone who cleans up after sick people for a living. You've discovered that social invisibility is both a disadvantage and a tool. People forget you're there. They talk in front of you. You learn things. You've learned, for instance, that Lieutenant Hawke, the second lieutenant, a thin, precise man of 28, who comes from a naval family and knows it, thinks the sick berth is a management problem more than a medical one. You overheard him tell the first lieutenant, standing in the passageway outside the orlop, that men who end up in the sick berth have usually brought it on themselves through intemperance or carelessness, and that a firm hand on rations and privileges would reduce the numbers considerably. You thought about John Pierce falling from the rigging in a Cape Finisterre squall and landing on a yardarm. You thought about Silas, who has spent 40 years in service and is now dissolving from the inside out because the Navy can't or won't provide him fresh fruit. You thought about what firm hand on rations and privileges has to do with any of that. You didn't say anything. You're 17, and Lieutenant Hawke carries a sword, and you carry a ladle. But you thought it. Breakfast happens whenever you can get it. For the sick berth staff, which is Mr. Dodd yourself and Will Creech, who is 22 and has been a loblolly boy for 3 years and has developed a philosophical serenity about the whole business that you alternately admire and find alarming. Breakfast is a negotiation with the ship's schedule. Will is already at the cook's domain when you get there, leaning against the bulkhead with his arms crossed and the expression he wears when waiting, which is blank in a specific way, like a man who has emptied himself of anticipation because anticipation leads to disappointment, and disappointment takes energy he doesn't have. Dodd speaking to the captain, he asks. News travels faster on this ship than you'd believe possible given the absence of any formal communication system. About Pierce's leg, Will nods. I'd give it 2 days. 3 if Dodd wants to try one more dressing change. You've had this conversation before. The calculation of when a decision will be made, the weighing of medical judgment against the realities of what a human body can sustain. And it doesn't get easier. It gets more precise. You get better at the calculation. You don't get better at the thing the calculation is about. Big slides a bowl at you across the wooden ledge. Burgoo, a porridge of oatmeal and slush, which is the rendered fat from the salt meat. It tastes like what it is. It is warm, and warmth on the orlop in November is not something you take for granted. You eat standing up because there's nowhere to sit that isn't a coil of rope or someone else's sea chest. Storm coming, Will says, between mouthfuls. How do you know? He tilts his head upward toward the hull above. Hear how she's talking? That low sound, the one like the wood is thinking? She does that before weather. You eat. You listen. You can hear what he means, or maybe you're hearing it because he told you to hear it. Either way, the ship is making a sound beneath the regular sounds, a deeper register, something felt more in the chest than heard through the ears. When? Tonight, maybe tomorrow. He scrapes his bowl. Good time to be below decks. You think about the men in the sick berth, about the way the hammocks swing when the weather comes up, about Pierce's leg and the way every movement of the ship moves him. Right, you say. You're doing that thing, Will says, where you worry with your face. I'm not worried. Tom, I've watched 3 loblolly boys come through before you. You'll do the same thing. You start caring about the patients. It makes sense. Spend all day with them, morning to night. Of course you care. A pause. Just remember, he says, you can care and still do the job. You can't do the job properly if you care so much you freeze. He puts his bowl on the ledge and pushes off the bulkhead and heads aft toward the sick berth. You finish your burgoo. It tastes like slush and oatmeal, and the fact of being on a ship in the North Atlantic in November. You follow him. Mr. Dodd comes back from the captain at 7:30. You know it's 7:30 because the ship's bell has rung once in the morning watch, and you've learned to tell time by bells the way you used to tell time by church clocks in Somerset, which is to say, imprecisely, but with confidence. He comes in, sets his hat on the hook, opens his surgical chest and begins laying out instruments. The surgical chest is a thing of terrible beauty. It's mahogany, lined with green baize, and it contains the complete inventory of what medicine on a Navy ship can offer in 1744. There are probes for locating ball and shot in wounds. There are forceps of various sizes. There are tourniquets. The tourniquet is a relatively recent innovation, and Mr. Dodd has strong feelings about its proper use. There are needles and silk thread for suturing. There are amputation knives, long curved, designed for speed. There are saws, small and large. There are bullet extractors that look like they were designed by someone who hated their job and everyone else's. He lays out the large amputation knife, the large saw, the tourniquet, the silk thread, the dressings rolled and ready, the pitch pot which will be heated to seal the stump. He doesn't explain any of this. You stand in the doorway and watch him do it and understand. Will, Mr. Dodd says without looking up. Sir, get Rawlings and Foster from the carpenter's crew. I need men who are strong and don't faint. Rawlings and Foster are 2 of the largest men on the ship. They've helped with this before. They know what they're being asked to do. Tom? Sir, I'll need you here. You know the instruments. You know the order. Yes, sir. You've seen this done twice. Yes, sir. A third time is a third time. He looks at you directly, which he doesn't always do. Keep your footing. Keep your hand steady. If something goes wrong that you can prevent, prevent it. If something goes wrong that you can't prevent, get out of the way. Yes, sir. He picks up the tourniquet, examines it, sets it down. The man's name is John Pierce, he says. I know him, sir. Yes. A pause. I know you do. He turns back to the instruments. You go to tell Pierce. This is genuinely one of the hardest parts of the job. The part where no one tells you it's your responsibility, but someone has to do it. And you're the one who spent the last 3 weeks handing John Pierce his loblolly every morning and asking how he was and learning not to show the look on your face. You go to his berth. He's lying in the same position he's been in since the conversation this morning, looking at the ceiling. You don't say anything immediately. You pull up the 3-legged stool that lives beside the berth and sit on it, which is something you don't normally do. You're usually moving. You're usually carrying something. Sitting still signals something. He looks at you. Now? He asks. Yes. He breathes out through his nose, slowly, like a man releasing something he'd been holding. Right, he says. Mr. Dodd is very good at this, you say, which is true. He's fast. Aye. He looks at his left leg, the bandaged shape under the canvas. 12 years I've kept that leg. Falls, fights, 2 battles. I fell off a mast in the Caribbean in 38 and landed in the water and swam back to the ship. You say nothing. Just a leg, he says. But his voice is slightly different on those words. Not broken, just different. Men manage. They do. He's quiet for a moment. Then, Tom, when it's done, when I wake up, when, you agree. Tell me straight. No softening. I want to know what's left. Yes. He holds out his right hand. You shake it. Which feels strange and right at the same time. This formal gesture between a topman and a loblolly boy, 17 years old, in the sick berth at the bottom of a navy ship. But John Pierce is the kind of man who marks things. Right, he says again. He lets go of your hand, turns back to the ceiling. Let's get on with it then. You've been told by people who've been at sea longer than you that amputation at the battle surgeon's table is somehow the cleanest of the bad options. You've been told that the organised pre-planned kind, the kind Mr. Dodd is conducting right now with Rawlings and Foster, and the instruments laid out in precise order, is considerably less awful than the emergency kind done in the middle of a battle, when men are still being brought down from the gun decks and the surgeon is working in 6 inches of blood and the ship is still firing. You hold this information while you stand at Mr. Dodd's left side and watch him work and hand him things in the order he asks for them. Rawlings and Foster are at the head and the body, respectively. Their job is to hold. They are very good at this. Their expressions are blank in the way of men who have decided the most useful thing they can do is remove their emotional responses from the room temporarily. Pierce has had rum. A considerable amount of rum. Not enough to take away what's about to happen, because there is no amount of rum that can accomplish that. Enough to blur the edges. Enough to give him somewhere else to be slightly, while his body remains here. He has leather to bite down on. He doesn't look at you when it starts. He looks at the ceiling. Mr. Dodd applies the tourniquet first, high on the thigh, tight. This is the innovation that saves the most lives, controlling the blood before you cut. Before the tourniquet, surgeons worked against a hemorrhage that was happening as they worked, a race between the knife and the blood. The tourniquet changes the mathematics, then the knife. You hand him what he asks for. You watch his hands, not his face, not Pierce's face. His hands, which are where the information is, which are where everything important is happening. His left hand, the one with the missing fingers, guides as much as it can. His right hand does the work. The knife is steady. It moves with a specific kind of economy, no wasted motion, no hesitation, because hesitation is kindness reversed. Hesitation extends the duration, and the only mercy available here is speed. Pierce makes a sound. It comes through the leather, muffled, controlled, but it's there. Rawlings holds firm. Foster holds firm. You stand your ground. The saw next. You hand it to him. This is the part you hadn't understood before the first time, the way it sounds. I'm not going to describe it in detail. Some sounds, once heard, become reference points for everything else in your life. And what I'll tell you is that Mr. Dodd is very fast, and speed is the only mercy, and he earns his pay in these moments in ways that nothing else he does comes close to. 45 seconds. Pierce is breathing, fast and hard through his nose, both hands gripping the sides of the berth, but breathing. That's the critical thing. He's breathing. The stump. Mr. Dodd works quickly, sewing, binding, applying the pitch. The smell of heated pitch is terrible and also in this context reassuring. It seals, it stops the bleeding, it's crude, and it works. Done, Mr. Dodd says. He says it the way you'd say done about a task, matter-of-factly. Because for him, it is a task. The task is over. Alive? Pierce says. His voice is rough, strange. Alive, you say. You're the one who answers because you're the one standing where he can see you. He makes a sound that might be a laugh. It doesn't quite make it to the surface. He passes out then, which is actually the best possible outcome. Sleep is the body's first medication. You and Will clean the berth. You do this quietly and methodically, and you don't think about what you're cleaning, because thinking about it accomplishes nothing, and the work has to be done. When it's finished, and Pierce is settled, and the instruments are being cleaned, Mr. Dodd is standing in the doorway doing something you've never seen him do before. He's standing still, doing nothing, his hands at his sides, looking at the wall of the sick berth. You come to stand a few feet away. You don't say anything. After a moment he says, "You held well." "Thank you, sir." "Third time is different from the second time." "Yes, sir." "Fourth will be different from the third." He picks up his hat. It does not get easier, but it gets more possible. He leaves. You stand in the sick berth with 8 men breathing around you in the dark, and the ship rolling gently under your feet, and the lantern swinging. You've been awake for, by your calculation, slightly over 2 hours. Will was right about the storm. It comes that evening. It doesn't announce itself the way storms on land do. No darkening of the sky visible from where you are. No distant rumble of thunder that gives you time to prepare yourself. On the orlop deck you have no windows, no horizon, no sky. What you have is the ship, and the ship tells you what's happening the way a horse tells a rider. Through movement, through sound, through 1,000 small signals that you've been learning to read without quite realizing you're learning them. First, the motion changes. The long rolling swells of the North Atlantic, which you've almost gotten used to in 6 weeks. The ones that lift the bow and release it in a rhythm that your body has begun to accept as normal. Those change quality. They shorten. They become choppier, less predictable. The Resolute starts to yaw between rolls, a twisting motion that is worse than simple rolling, in a way that's hard to articulate but immediately felt in the stomach. Second, the sound changes. More noise from the rigging above, the wind finding the ropes at a different angle, producing a higher pitch, a keening sound that comes down through the hull and the decks and reaches you on the orlop as something between a moan and a shriek. Third, the men in the sick berth start moving. Not dramatically. They don't stand up or panic. But the ones who've been at sea long enough start adjusting without being asked, wedging themselves more firmly into their berths, tightening their grip on whatever's available. Small preparatory movements that their bodies have learned to make before their minds have caught up to the fact that the weather is changing. Silas reaches out and hooks his fingers through the rope netting on the side of his berth. He doesn't say anything. He just hooks his fingers in and holds on. You go around the sick berth and check the lashings. Everything that can move you secure. The medicine chest, locked already, always locked, but you check the latches. The surgical instruments in their own chests stowed in the cupboard. The basins, the buckets, the bottles on their shelf. You've been drilled on this by Will, who was drilled on it by whoever was the loblolly boy before him. On a ship in rough weather, anything that isn't secured becomes a projectile. A glass bottle of mercury compound sailing across the sick berth at 3 a.m. in a force-8 gale is not a theoretical problem. It's an actual problem that has actually happened, and Will described it in enough detail that you don't need it described again. Then the Resolute takes a wave on her beam, her side, and the entire world tilts. Not a gentle tilt. Not the kind of gentle roll you've been living with for 6 weeks. A real tilt, sudden, the kind where the floor becomes a slope, and everything that isn't lashed down slides toward the low side simultaneously. And there's a second where it feels like the ship has decided to simply keep going, keep tilting, and become a submarine instead of a warship. Then she rights herself, slowly, groaning in every timber. Something falls in the space above you. A distant crash, muffled by decks, followed by shouting. From up top, 2 decks and a world above, you can hear the officers' voices, not the words, but the tone. Commands being issued, men moving at speed, the sound of the capstan being manned, the stamp of feet. Down here you grip the support beam beside you and wait for the next one. "Here we go," Will says, from somewhere behind you. His voice is entirely calm. The voice of a man who has been through this enough times that calm has become the only reasonable response. The next wave comes. I want you to understand what a North Atlantic storm in November feels like from the all-up deck of a 64-gun ship of the line, because it's not something you can intuit from outside. You can't see anything. That's the first thing. No horizon, no sky, no reference point. The only visual information you have is the swinging lantern, the walls, the sick berth, the faces of the men around you lit in that orange, uncertain light. Everything else is sound and movement. The sound, the hull working. That's what sailors call it. When the ship is stressed, when the sea is pressing on her from all sides at changing angles, she flexes. Slightly. Just slightly. She's designed to, actually. A rigid ship would break. A ship that flexes survives. But flexing means the timbers moving against each other, the caulked seams shifting, and that makes a sound like the world's largest piece of furniture being slowly disassembled by someone who is in no hurry. And the water. You can hear the water against the hull directly beside your head. The sea is 6 inches away from you, separated by 14 inches of oak and tar and faith in the shipwrights at Chatham who built this vessel in 1737. 6 inches, 4 feet, 20 feet. The depth doesn't really matter when you're hearing it like this. Hearing it press and surge and recede and press again. Relentless, indifferent. The movement, not describable in terms of simple directions. It's all directions simultaneously. The long rise and fall of the swell beneath you. The roll side to side, sharper now, deeper. The occasional yaw, where the bow swings left or right when a wave catches it wrong. The pitch, the ship's nose driving down into a trough and then lifting. All of these happening at once, in combinations that produce a motion with no name because no one word covers what happens to your inner ear when it's being asked to process this much conflicting information. The men in the sick berth manage it differently according to their condition. Silas holds his netting and closes his eyes. He's been at sea so long the motion is more natural to him than stillness. Two of the fever patients, men in hammocks rather than berths, not critical enough for the fixed bunks, swing with the motion, which is actually the best thing to do in a hammock, swinging being the hammock's entire point, except that when the motion is extreme the swing becomes something else, and the two men hold on with the grim expressions of people enduring something they cannot control. Pierce is the one you're watching. He's newly operated on. His stump is bandaged and dressed and treated as well as 1,744. Medicine can treat it. But he's lying in a fixed berth, and every movement of the ship moves him, and you can see in his jaw, in the set of his face, what that costs him. You wedge yourself beside his berth, braced against the support timber, and you put a hand on the berth frame beside him. Not on him, just present, just nearby, something fixed in a moving world. He doesn't say anything, but his jaw unclenches slightly. Above you, the storm is working. The Resolute is rolling 30 degrees to each side at the worst of it. 30 degrees doesn't sound like much until you're in it, until you're watching the angle of the lantern against the wall and calculating. 30 degrees means the floor becomes a slope that even an adult struggles to stand on, that unsecured items slide across, that men brace with both hands or fall. 30 degrees on a ship means the gun deck above is a chaos of secured equipment, straining against its lashings and men clinging to whatever they can find. It means the cook's domain, which has an actual fire in it, has become an emergency that someone is managing very carefully. It means that on the gun deck, 40 years of sailor instinct is the only thing between the cannons and the men beside them. The night passes this way. You don't sleep. You monitor. You check lashings, check patience, check that nothing has come loose that can hurt someone, check that the lantern hasn't started a fire. Lanterns and wooden ships in rough weather are a combination that requires constant attention, which is why the Navy's standing orders about lanterns fill several pages. At some point in the middle of the night, the coughing man, Thomas Griggs, a carpenter's mate from Derbyshire, in the sick berth for a chest complaint that began as a cold and has expanded its ambitions, sits up and looks at you with feverish eyes and says, "Are we sinking?" "No," you say. "Are you sure?" "She's a 64-gun ship of the line. She's been through worse than this." He looks at the wall, at the sounds coming through it. "How do you know she's been through worse than this?" You open your mouth and close it. "We're not sinking," you say again. He lies back down. You spend the next hour performing some private calculations about what worse than this might actually mean, and whether your reassurance was technically accurate, and you decide that on balance it was close enough. The storm breaks around 4 a.m, not all at once, gradually. The motion lessens in stages. each wave slightly smaller than the last, the rolls slightly less violent, until eventually the Resolute is back to her familiar long swell roll, and the sounds through the hull have subsided from crisis to conversation. You become aware of your own body. Your hands ache from bracing. Your shoulders are tight from hours of tension you didn't notice accumulating. Your feet are numb from the cold planking. Your mouth is dry. You're hungry, though it took until now for hunger to reassert itself over the other competing priorities. Will appears in the doorway. He's been in the ship's interior, the spaces between the orlop and the gun decks, doing whatever needed doing during the night. He's wet. His coat is dark with it. His face is the same as always, calm, slightly tired, entirely present. "All good?" he asks. You look around the sick berth. 8 men, all accounted for, all breathing. "All good," you say. He nods, goes to the medicine chest, checks the latches, finds them secure, nods again. Goes to Pierce's berth. "Pierce," he says. "Still here," Pierce says. "Leg?" "What leg?" Will smiles at that. Pierce almost does. "Get some sleep," Will tells you. 2 hours, I've got the watch. You want to protest that you're fine, that you don't need sleep, but the truth is that the protest would be dishonest and Will would know it. You go to your hammock. You wrap yourself in your coat. The ship rolls gently beneath you. You're asleep before the next bell. 3 days after the storm, you go above decks for the first time in 2 weeks. This is not your own decision. Mr. Dodd sends you. 2 of the fever patients need fresh air, as much fresh air as the North Atlantic in November can provide, and someone has to accompany them, and that someone is you, because Will is needed in the dispensary and Mr. Dodd doesn't do escort duty. You help Thomas Griggs up from his berth. He's weak enough that this requires actual assistance. You take his weight on your right side, one arm around him, and he holds your shoulder and breathes through the effort of standing upright for the first time in 5 days. His legs are working, but tentatively, like a man testing ice. "Ready?" you ask. "Not even slightly," he says. "Let's go." You go up through the ship, through the orlop, up the ladder to the lower gun deck, where the great 32-pound cannons sit in their ports on each side, lashed tight, covered with their tompions. The gun deck smells of gunpowder and grease, and the specific oily smell of the cannons themselves, maintained and ready. Men are working. There's always work on a gun deck, always something to check, to maintain, to ready. And they move around you and Griggs without much acknowledgement. 2 more bodies in a ship full of bodies. Up another ladder to the upper gun deck. The 18-pounders, later than the lower guns, arranged in the same pattern. Ports closed against the November weather. Then up again, and the hatch, and cold. A wall of it. Not the damp cold of the orlop, but something clean and sharp and violent. Air that has come across the North Atlantic from somewhere far enough west that it carries no memory of land at all. It hits your face like a hand, sudden and undeniable. And for a moment you just stand there in the hatch opening and breathe it. The smell of the ocean, not the bilge, not the sick berth. Not the tallow candles and the camphor and the infected wounds. The ocean itself, which smells like salt and cold and wind and nothing else at all. Nothing accumulated, nothing human. You help Griggs the last few feet onto the weather deck, and then you see it. The sky. I don't know how to properly explain what the sky looks like after you haven't seen it for 2 weeks. Maybe it depends on what kind of person you are, and what you've been doing in those 2 weeks, and what you've had inside your head in the absence of it. For you, right now, in November of 1744, After 2 weeks in the sick berth, and 1 night with a storm pressing against the hull, and 3 days watching John Pierce learn to exist with less than he had before, for you, the sky is enormous. It's not beautiful. It's grey. November, North Atlantic, grey. The colour of pewter, the colour of old wool. Clouds moving fast and low. The light flat and silver and cold. It is absolutely not beautiful in any conventional sense, but it is vast. And that vastness, after 2 weeks in a space 12 feet by 9, is something that hits you in the chest in a way that has nothing to do with sentiment and everything to do with what confined spaces do to a person's sense of scale. The sea stretches out in every direction to a horizon that is itself grey, indistinguishable from the sky at its edges, as if the world has no boundary, as if the ship is simply floating in the centre of an infinite grey sphere. No land, nowhere. The Resolute moves through this endless grey with a confidence that feels, from up here, almost improbable. She's enormous by the standards of anything you've ever stood on, 160 feet long, higher than a house at the mainmast, and against the ocean she's a splinter. She's a chip. She's an act of tremendous and slightly mad human assertion, sailing through the middle of nowhere with 500 people on the claim that this is a reasonable thing to be doing. Grigg stands beside you and breathes. You both breathe, actually. Just standing there on the weather deck in the cold, breathing air that has never been in a sick berth. Christ, Grigg says. His voice is different up here. Bigger somehow, the way voices get when there's space for them. Yes, you agree. A gull appears from somewhere. You have no idea where gulls come from this far at sea, what they're doing here, what they're eating, where they intend to go, and circles the ship once and disappears. Griggs lifts his face into the wind. He closes his eyes. He's a carpenter's mate from Derbyshire, from a landlocked county, and he's been at sea for 3 years, and he's been sick for 2 weeks, and right now his face is something that you don't have a word for, but that you know you'll remember. Gets into you, he says, without opening his eyes. The sea, even when it's trying to kill you, gets into you. You look out at the grey water, at the grey sky, at the horizon that goes on forever. You're beginning to understand what he means. You stay above decks for an hour. You're not supposed to stay that long, Dodd said, fresh air, and then back below. But Griggs is eating the air in a way that's visibly doing him good. His colour improving in real time, something loosening in his chest that the sick berth couldn't reach, and you make an executive decision that 2 loblolly boys and a surgeon would make in the same situation. You stay. You walk with him slowly along the weather deck, staying inboard, away from the rail. The deck is wet from the storm's aftermath, the planking dark with salt water, and it moves underfoot in the long swell with a motion that you register differently up here than below. Down on the orlop, the motion is something that happens to you. Up here, you can see where it's coming from. You can watch the swell approach, watch the bow lift to meet it, feel the rise and fall with a context that makes it something closer to a relationship. The men working the deck don't pay you particular attention. A loblolly boy and a recovering patient are not remarkable. What's remarkable about the weather deck is everyone else. The men in the rigging, topmen, the ones like Pierce used to be, moving through the ratlines with a casual confidence that looks impossible at speed. Going hand over hand up the shrouds 40, 60, 80 feet above the deck, the ship rolling beneath them, the wind taking their coats sideways. You watch them and think about Pierce, and then you think, he chose this. He chose this when he was 14 years old and has been choosing it every year since. And what happened to him was the sea asserting the terms of the bargain he'd made. Not punishment, not injustice, just the terms, which doesn't make it better, but it makes it something other than senseless. On the quarterdeck, slightly raised, slightly separate, the domain of officers, you can see the captain, Captain James Morden, 51, who you've seen 3 times total in 6 weeks and never at close range. From here he's a figure in a good coat standing at the rail, looking at the same grey horizon you're looking at. He looks like a man who is entirely comfortable with this situation. He looks like a man who does not find the North Atlantic alarming. You wonder if he actually feels that way, or if that's a face he's learned to wear. Probably both. Probably, after enough years, you stop being able to separate what you feel from what you've learned to present as what you feel. They fuse together. The performance becomes the reality. Should head back down, Griggs says, eventually. Not reluctantly. Practically. His body has gotten what it needed. He can feel it. Yes. Tom, yes. Thank you for staying the extra time. You open your mouth to say it was nothing, which is the automatic response. Then you don't, because it wasn't nothing. It was an hour of cold air on someone who needed it, and both of you know that, and calling it nothing doesn't honour the truth of it. Glad it helped, you say instead. You help him back down below. The Resolute has been at sea for 6 weeks on this voyage, heading south and east, toward waters that officers discuss in low voices, and the crew discusses in the general way of men who know roughly where they're going, and exactly what that might mean. There's a war on, the War of the Austrian Succession, which is a grand name for a conflict that has been churning across Europe since 1740 and has involved practically every major power in some capacity. Britain is fighting France, among others. The Navy's job in this war is, as the Navy's job usually is, threefold. Protect British merchant ships, harass enemy merchant ships, and engage enemy warships when the opportunity presents itself. The Resolute is looking for that third kind of opportunity. You know this the way everyone on the ship knows it, through implication, through overheard conversation, through the set of the officers' faces when dispatches arrive and are taken below, through the way the gun crews are drilled every 3rd day, through the way the powder monkeys, boys even younger than you, some as young as 12, whose job in battle is to carry powder charges from the magazine to the guns, have been running drills that they take seriously in a way that boys usually don't. It will happen. At some point on this voyage, you will hear the drum beat to quarters, which is the signal for battle stations, and what happens after that will be something that Mr. Dodd has briefed you on at length, because the sick berth's role in battle is specific and urgent and different from its role in peacetime. In battle, the sick berth is cleared of its regular patients. The sick are moved further aft to make room, and becomes the operating space. Pierce, Silas, Griggs, all of them, shuffled to whatever space can be found to accommodate them, while the berth is scrubbed and the surgical table is set up, and Mr. Dodd positions himself where he'll spend the battle, operating continuously on whatever comes down from the gun decks. You will be beside him, passing instruments, holding men down, managing the flow of the wounded in a space designed for 8 patients that in a major engagement will receive dozens. Mr. Dodd has described this to you with the same flat precision he uses for everything. He didn't offer you a choice in the matter, which is correct. You have none. But he also didn't treat you as though you ought to be frightened, which is its own kind of respect. You'll function, he said. You've already proven that. The amputation was what he meant. You held then. You'll hold then. You think about this on the quiet days, when the routine of the sick berth has a kind of meditative repetition to it. Rounds, gruel, dressings, medicines, rounds again. And you try to imagine what it will be like, and you can't really, because imagination requires reference points you don't yet have. You just have what you've already done, and the knowledge that you did it. Silas gets worse before he gets better. This is the nature of scurvy that Mr. Dodd has prepared you for. The arc of the disease is not linear. A man can stabilise for a week, seem almost himself, and then something tips. A cold night, a run of particularly bad rations, a fever, and he falls further than before. Silas's ankles have swelled to the point where the skin is shiny and tight. The bruising on his skin has spread. His gums, when you tend to them in the morning, are soft now in a way that makes your stomach turn. Soft in the way that means the tissue is breaking down, the body withdrawing resources from places it no longer believes it can maintain. He's lucid, though. That's Silas. His mind stays clear while his body unravels. He talks in the long hours of the middle watches when the sick berth is quiet and you're the one on night duty. He talks about his 40 years at sea the way some old men talk about their children, cataloguing them, accounting for them, noting what worked and what didn't. Was at Trafalgar, he says one night, which can't be right. Trafalgar won't happen for another 60 years. But when you press him, he means something else. Some smaller engagement in the Mediterranean in 1706, which to Silas is apparently as significant as anything else in history. Were you scared, you ask him? He considers this seriously. First time, he says. After that, no, not the way you'd think. You're too busy during a battle to be scared. Scared comes after. When you're cleaning up, when you're counting who's not there anymore. He's quiet for a moment. The worst part isn't the battle. The worst part is waiting for the battle. Standing at your station, the ship cleared for action, hearing the other ship out there in the dark and waiting. How long does the waiting last? Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours. Once off Sicily we waited all night. The French ship just sat there, a mile off, not moving. We sat there, neither side doing anything. Sun came up and we could see her properly, and she could see us, and we sat there looking at each other for another 2 hours. Then she turned and ran. Were you relieved? He makes a complicated face. Mostly, partly not. You'd built up to it all night. You were ready, and then it just didn't happen. And you had to take all that readiness and put it back somewhere. He adjusts himself in the berth. Battle's a strange thing, he says. I've been in 9 of them. In the moment, your whole body knows what to do. Years of training. The fear goes somewhere else. And then afterward, your hands shake. Sometimes for days. He looks at his hands. They're shaking slightly now, which is the scurvy and not the memory, but the gesture is the same. You'll be all right, he says, which is unexpected. He's talking about what he knows you're thinking about. How do you know? Because you're the kind of person who tends to men in the sick berth and stays the extra hour above decks when a fever patient needs air. He looks at you with those sharp eyes, sharper than the rest of him right now. You don't do the minimum. That's the thing about people who do the minimum. They do the minimum in a crisis too. And people who don't, they don't. You sit with that. Get some sleep, Silas. I'm not sleeping. I'm resting my bones. Rest them quietly. He almost laughs. the almost laugh that's become its own kind of communication between you. Mr. Dodd teaches you, in the in-between times, when the sick berth is stable and there's a moment to use. He doesn't call it teaching. He just talks, working, and you listen, and information accumulates. About scurvy. Vitamin, they'll call it eventually. Something in citrus fruit, fresh vegetables. Something the body needs that salt meat doesn't provide. We know the effect. We don't yet know the mechanism. Lind at Edinburgh has made progress. The Navy hasn't acted on it yet. He says the last part in a specific tone, not angry, something more controlled than anger. The voice of a man who has been making the same argument for years and has decided to continue making it regardless of result. About fever. Most of the fevers on ships are the same few things. Typhus most commonly, which comes from the lice, which come from overcrowding, which is simply the condition of a naval vessel. The treatment for typhus is to not get it, which is somewhat circular advice. He pauses. What we can do, keep the spaces as clean as possible, wash the men as much as possible, burn sulphur in the hold periodically, which may or may not kill lice, but at least gives the impression of doing something. About surgery, speed is mercy. Never forget that. A man on your table is enduring something that your hesitation extends. You learn the anatomy. I will teach you the anatomy, so that you know where to cut and where not to cut, and you go fast. The blood you can manage. The infection that follows is harder. Clean your instruments. Clean the wounds as well as you can. Pray if you're inclined to it. He says the last sentence without irony. Mr. Dodd is a religious man in a quiet, practical way. The kind of religion that doesn't involve churches so much as a general acknowledgement that some things are beyond his control and something might be managing them. About the medicine chest. Everything in it has a specific use and a specific dose. The laudanum you give for pain, never more than I indicate, because more than I indicate kills. The mercury compounds you use only as directed because mercury is a poison we're employing as a medicine, which is a balance that requires precision. The surgeon's job is to understand exactly which poison, in exactly what quantity, cures rather than kills. He says this last part and then looks at the medicine chest for a moment. Most of medicine right now in 1744 is a calibrated form of harm reduction, he says. We don't know enough yet. We think we know, and we're wrong about half of it, and we don't yet know which half. He closes the chest. This is not comfortable information. Learn to be useful while holding it. Will tells you about the ship's social geography the way a native guide explains terrain. Matter-of-factly, without judgment, just the information you need to navigate. The wardroom, he says, the wardroom is the officers' mess, is another world. They eat different food, better food. And because they eat better food, they get less scurvy. This is not a coincidence, and both of you know it. When you're up on errands, stay away from the midshipman's berth unless you're summoned. They're young, most of them, and bored, and they outrank you, and that's a combination that ends badly for loblolly boys. You think of Midshipman Richard, 16 years old, dreaming of his mother. What about the surgeon? Where does he eat? Wardroom, technically. He's a warrant officer, same status as the purser and the carpenter, but Dodd usually eats here. Will gestures at the dispensary, the small space adjacent to the sick berth. He doesn't like leaving the patients. This tracks with what you know of Mr. Dodd. Is he a good surgeon? Will thinks about this properly. Not quickly. I've seen 3 ship surgeons, he says. One was drunk most of the time and killed more men than he saved. One was competent but cold. treated the men like problems to be processed. Dodd is the third kind. He's good and he gives a damn, which is rarer than it should be. He picks up his mug, considers it. He lost a patient last year. Fever that he thought was manageable wasn't. The man died on a Tuesday, and on Wednesday Dodd didn't speak to anyone, and on Thursday he was working again. But I saw his hands the day after, shaking. He looks at his own hands. The ones who give a damn, their hands shake. The ones who don't, they sleep fine. He's quiet for a moment. Whose hands shake is how you tell which surgeons are worth having, he says, though I suppose the same thing is true of loblolly boys. Pierce wakes up. Not just wakes in the moment, he's been waking, sleeping, cycling through the fever that followed the surgery, but wakes properly one morning 11 days after the operation, his eyes clear for the first time, his voice back to something recognisable. You're doing morning rounds. You come to his berth and he looks at you with the clear eyes and says, "What day is it?" Thursday, November the 17th. He processes this, does the arithmetic. 11 days. Yes. He looks down at his leg, at where his leg ends. You've thought about this moment. What you'd say. You have 17 years of experience with the world and 6 weeks on this ship and a very limited script for what words are correct here. It looks clean, you say. Mr. Dodd says the stump is healing well. The infection didn't spread. He's quiet for a moment. Straight, he said, that day, before the surgery. Tell me straight. You're going to be all right, you say. The leg is gone, but you're going to be all right. He nods, just once. The nod of a man who needed to hear something confirmed, who already knew it was true, who needed it stated aloud. Greenwich, he says. Greenwich. He leans back. His face is doing something complex that he's not quite controlling. 37 is not old, he says. No. Men manage at Greenwich. Silas said so. Good food. A roof. Yes. He closes his eyes. You move on to the next berth. Behind you. So quiet you almost miss it. Tom? Yes. Good lad. His voice is rough, controlled, exact. Don't let anyone tell you different. You keep walking. You do morning rounds. Your face does whatever it does. Will is kind enough not to mention it. The drum beats to quarters on a Tuesday. You hear it from the sick berth. That specific pattern, repeated, steady, cutting through every other sound on the ship. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, repeated. For a fraction of a second your body doesn't understand what it's hearing. Then it does. You look at Will. Will is already moving. Clear the berths, he says. Do it now, gently but fast. What follows is 12 minutes of organised chaos that you and Will have rehearsed in theory, but are performing for the first time in practice. The regular patients, Silas, the 2 fever men, the man with the rope burn wound, 2 others in various states of recovery, need to be moved further aft into whatever space exists. Their hammocks, their blankets, their medicines. Pierce, who can't be moved easily, stays in his berth, which is pushed to the side to create space. The operating table, planks on sawhorses stored against the bulkhead, goes up in the centre of the sick berth. Mr. Dodd is already there. He has his coat off. He's in shirt sleeves, which you've only seen once before. He's laying out instruments with the same precise economy as before, and his face is nothing, entirely neutral. A face that has decided to be useful rather than expressive. What's out there, you ask Will quietly. Can't know until it starts. French? Most likely. Above you, through 2 decks, you can hear the ship coming alive in a different way than normal. The sound of the gun ports opening, all 48 of them, and the gun carriages running out, feet moving in precise patterns, commands in voices that are carrying, controlled, doing exactly what they've drilled to do. The Resolute is turning. You can feel it in the motion, the ship coming around on a new heading. Then, the first gun. It's not from the Resolute. It's from the other ship, which means the other ship fired first, which tells you something about the geometry of the situation that you file away. The sound comes through the hull like something physical. Not a bang, not a crack, more of a pressure wave, a change in the air itself, a sound your body registers before your ears do. 2 seconds, then the Resolute fires. This is a different experience entirely from hearing someone else's gun. When all 24 guns on the port side of the Resolute fire simultaneously, the ship shudders. The whole 160-foot length of her shudders, a physical shock wave that goes through the hull and the decks and through you. The lanterns in the sick berth swing violently. Dust falls from between the deck planks above. The sound is beyond sound. It's something that the word sound doesn't quite cover. A violence of air and pressure that exists in the body as much as the ears. Then another broadside from the other ship, and this one is closer. You can tell by the sound, and by what follows it. Above you, crashing. Not the clean crash of something being jettisoned or moved. The complex crash of something structural being hit. Then shouting. Many voices overlapping, and beneath that a sound that you've heard in the sick berth in small individual doses and are now hearing at a different scale and with a different urgency. The first man comes down in 4 minutes. I want to tell you, here, what I've learned about what happens to the surgeon's mate during a naval battle, because it doesn't appear in the histories that talk about tactics and manoeuvres and which admiral made which decision. What happens is this. You stand in the sick berth at the bottom of the ship, and people are brought to you, and you help make them survivable, or you help them die with more comfort than they'd have alone. And the battle above you continues without your participation, and you hear everything through the hull without being able to see any of it. And that specific combination, the sounds, the proximity, the invisibility, is its own particular kind of endurance. The first man, a gun crew member from the upper deck, 19 years old, splinter wound across his right arm and shoulder, wooden splinters from the ship's own structure. The guns, when they fire, can cause the ship's timbers to splinter as much as incoming shot, and wooden splinters at cannon-driven velocity are not what you'd expect. They're not small. They enter flesh the way knives do. They go deep. He's conscious, walking, more or less. He sits on the table and breathes in a controlled way while Mr. Dodd examines the arm, probing with practiced fingers, and tells you to hold the lantern closer, and you hold it closer, and you don't look away. The splinter, the main one, is still in the muscle below the shoulder. Mr. Dodd takes the probe first, locating it precisely. Then the forceps. The man grips the sides of the table. His breathing changes. Mr. Dodd works steadily, and you hand him what he asks for, and when he gets the splinter out, 3 inches of oak, irregular, black with tar, he holds it up briefly and then sets it aside. "Dress it," he says. "He's done." The man slides off the table. You dress the wound. He goes back to his station, back to the gun, because you're in the middle of a battle and the Navy requires that people who can still function. More come. The battle lasts 2 hours and 40 minutes. You know this because later someone tells you. At the time, you have no sense of duration whatsoever. You have the table and the instruments and the men on the table and the sounds through the hull, which you stop consciously hearing after the first 20 minutes because you have no attention to spare for them. Mr. Dodd operates without stopping. He operates the way a craftsman works, the same focused economy of motion regardless of what's happening. You watch his hands and give him what his hands reach for, and you learn to anticipate. The probe goes in first, always, to locate before cutting. The forceps next, the suture kit staged and ready before the wound is closed. There are 17 men on the operating table over those 2 hours and 40 minutes. Most of them go back to their stations. 3 do not. 2 die on the table. Not on Mr. Dodd's hands specifically. The wounds they come in with are incompatible with surviving, and this is the reality of cannon shot and wooden ship, that some of what it produces is not fixable by any medicine available in any century, but they die here, in this space, and you are present for it. The third dies an hour after surgery, on the berth. You're sitting beside him when it happens, because he was conscious and frightened, and someone should be there, and Mr. Dodd is still working. You hold his hand, which you don't think about as a decision. It's just what your hand does. He's a gunner's mate from Plymouth, 32 years old. He says something you can't quite hear. Then he doesn't say anything. You close his eyes. You don't know why this is the correct thing to do, but it is, clearly, and you do it. You go back to the table. The battle ends. Above you, the sound changes. The guns stop. The shouting changes register. New voices, different urgency. The controlled emergency of after. The drum does not beat to quarters again. You and Will clean the operating space for the second time that afternoon. Mr. Dodd writes in his log. His handwriting is very precise and very small, and he writes for longer than you'd expect. The log of a ship's surgeon in battle is a formal document, recording wounds, treatments, outcomes, recording names. When he's done, he puts down his pen. His hands are resting on the table. 9 days, he says. You don't understand immediately. The surgeon is in an engagement for the 9 days' preparation before it. Not on deck, not at a gun. In a berth somewhere, probably, wondering what's happening above. He looks at his hands, and 2 hours and 40 minutes on the table, and weeks of what comes after. He picks up his pen again, makes one more note. That is the experience of battle from where we stand, he says. Noted. After a battle, the ship is a specific kind of quiet. Not peaceful. There's still work. Always work. Clearing the decks, assessing damage, making repairs, accounting for the dead. But the quality of the noise is different. The battle's noise was sharp, sudden, violent. The after noise is slower, deliberate. The sound of a ship settling back into itself. You're allowed above decks again. This time you go alone, without a patient to escort, because Mr. Dodd tells you to get air for an hour and means it as medicine. You go up. The weather deck in the aftermath of a battle is a document of what happened. The gun carriages are run back in but not yet secured. They'll be cleaned first, swabbed, inspected for damage. There's blood on the planking near the forward guns, dark against the pale wood, being scrubbed by 2 men who work with the methodical attention of people who have done this before and understand that it's necessary. A section of rail amidships is simply gone, taken by a ball from the shape of the damage. The clean white wood of the break startling against the weathered teak around it. The other ship is gone. She was struck, you learn later. Struck her colours, surrendered, a French privateer of 36 guns that had been taking British merchant ships in the Bay of Biscay. She's being escorted somewhere by a prize crew from the Resolute. This is the machinery of the war. You fight, you capture, you claim the prize, and somewhere down the line there's money in it. Prize money distributed to the crew by formula, and this is part of why men volunteer rather than just running from press gangs. The possibility of enough. You stand at the rail and look at the sea. The ocean doesn't care. That's the thing that strikes you standing there. 2 ships fought here 2 hours ago, and 3 men died here. More, probably, on the French side. And the sea has made no accommodation for any of it. The waves are the same waves. The horizon is the same horizon. Whatever happened on the surface happened on the surface, and the Atlantic goes 40 miles deep and doesn't notice. This should be alienating. Probably it is, slightly. But there's something else in it too. Something that Silas keeps trying to tell you. That old sailor who is dissolving from the inside out and still calls the sea his home. The sea's indifference is not cruelty. It's just scale. The sea is not hostile to the Resolute or her crew. It's simply the sea doing what the sea does, and the ship is responsible for meeting it on those terms. You think about what happened in the sick berth, about the men on the table, about what your hands did and what they didn't do, and what the difference was between them. You held. Mr. Dodd said you'd function, and you functioned. The shaking in your hands has been going on since the battle ended. You noticed it during the clean-up, noticed it again now, your fingers against the rail slightly unsteady, slightly their own. Good. That's what Will said when he saw it. One word. Good. 'Cause the ones whose hands shake, those are the ones worth having. Week after the battle, a merchant ship passes close enough to make signal contact. There is on. That ship, among its cargo, a crate of lemons. Lemons. They are not for the Resolute. They are part of someone's commercial enterprise heading somewhere for sale. But the captain, informed of the situation in the sick berth, buys 12 of them from the merchant at a price you don't know and probably don't want to know, and they come aboard in a net. 12 lemons, impossibly yellow against the grey of the November deck, and Mr. Dodd takes them below with an expression that's as close to reverence as his face manages. He squeezes them, every one of them, into a bowl. The smell rises in the dispensary, bright and sharp and entirely unlike anything else on this ship. Citrus, actual citrus, and it hits the back of your throat like something your body recognizes as necessary. He mixes the juice with water and a small amount of ship's biscuit to extend it, and he takes it to Silas first. Silas drinks it. He holds the cup in both hands and drinks it slowly, the way you drink something you believed might be the last good thing. His eyes are closed. The juice is tart enough that his face puckers slightly, which with his current gums must be its own small agony. He drinks all of it. "More?" Mr. Dodd asks. "Tomorrow," Silas says, "if there is." "There will be." Silas opens his eyes. He looks at Mr. Dodd for a long moment. "Took you long enough," he says. And Mr. Dodd, who does not laugh, who has not laughed in your presence in 6 weeks, makes a sound that isn't quite a laugh, but is adjacent to it, close enough to count. 3 weeks later, in the 2nd week of December, the Resolute makes port. Gibraltar. You're above decks when it comes into view because you've started spending time above decks when you can. Standing at the rail, get in the air. You've developed a relationship with the cold now. Not friendly, but honest. You know what it will do to you and you know what to bring against it, and that's an understanding. The rock appears on the horizon first. Just a shape. A darkness above the line where sky meets sea. And then it becomes more. It becomes massive. Actually massive in the way you only understand when you're close to something truly large. And the Rock of Gibraltar rises above the bay with a vertical confidence that makes the Resolute's masts look like sticks. The bay is full of ships, British ships, Spanish ships, merchant ships from everywhere. The buildings of Gibraltar town, white, low, climbing the rock slopes, the smell, even from here, of land. You've forgotten what land smells like, or not forgotten exactly. You've had the smell stored somewhere, filed away, suspended, and now it arrives. Earth, stone, something growing, actual cooking fires using actual wood. Your nose does something embarrassing, processing all this information as good news. Around you, other men are at the rail, looking. Men who've been at sea longer than you, men who've seen Gibraltar before, and they're still at the rail. You're not the only one. First time? The man beside you asks. He's one of the gun crew, a Scotsman named McRae, 40 years old, hard as the guns he serves. First landfall, you say. First proper port? He nods, looks at the rock. She never gets smaller, he says. You'd think after enough time seeing it she'd seem smaller. She doesn't. The Resolute comes around into the bay and drops anchor with the sound and effort of 400 pounds of iron finding the bottom. The sails come in. The ship stills, actually stops moving in the way that you had almost forgotten a ship could stop. And the sudden stillness is so strange after weeks at sea that your legs don't quite believe it. Shore leave is allocated by the captain. 2 hours for each watch, rotating, which means some men get afternoon, and some get evening, and some get the wrong one entirely, and spend it cursing the rotation system. You get afternoon. You go ashore with Will, who's been here twice before, and navigates the town with an efficiency that makes you feel simultaneously impressed and like a tourist being managed. The streets of Gibraltar in December 1744 are not what you'd call pleasant. They're narrow and crowded and full of the smells of a port town. The universal port smell, which is salt water and fish and ropes and 100 other people's lives pressed together. But they are streets. They are stone. They do not move. You stop in the middle of one and just stand there. Will notices. Stop doing that, he says, not unkindly. The ground isn't moving. The ground doesn't move. That's the point of ground. It's extraordinary. Tom, he looks at you. You've been at sea 6 weeks. I've been at sea 3 years. Give it time. You'll stop noticing. You're not sure you want to stop noticing. You buy food from a market stall. Oranges. Actual oranges. For a price that is perfectly reasonable, given that they're oranges, and you've been living on salt pork and hardtack for 6 weeks. You eat one on the spot, standing there in the market, the juice running down your hands, and you feel slightly like crying, which is information you keep entirely to yourself. You buy 4 more for the sick berth. Will raises an eyebrow when you do this. For Silas, you say. I know, he says. That's why I didn't say anything. You walk through the town. You look at houses, at people who sleep in houses and are never at sea, and will probably never be at sea and don't know how good they have it. Cats sitting on walls in the afternoon sun, children running between stalls, a woman arguing with a vendor about the price of something in a language you don't speak, but the argument itself is universal. Everything is bright, everything is solid, everything smells of living rather than surviving. You stand on the edge of a small square and look up at the rock above the town, and you think about the Resolute in the bay below, and the sick berth in the Resolute, and Silas in his berth, and Pierce in his berth, and the 3 men who aren't in any berth anymore. You've been on that ship 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, you've learned things that you'll carry for the rest of your life, though you don't know yet which things or why or in what form they'll reappear. You just know that something is different in you. Something has shifted that can't be unshifted. And the boy who stood in Taunton listening to a recruiting sergeant describe adventure has become someone who knows what the adventure actually contains. The adventure contains the smell of the bilge. The adventure contains John Pierce's hand in yours before surgery. The adventure contains 2 hours and 40 minutes at the operating table while a battle happens above your head. The adventure contains 12 lemons and the face of an old sailor who believed they might still help. The adventure contains all of it. You eat your orange. You go back to the ship. The Resolute leaves Gibraltar in January. The sick berth is smaller now than when you came in. Smaller in occupancy. Silas is improved. Not well, not what he was, but improved. The lemons and supplemented rations from Gibraltar, having begun to show results in his gums and his skin. He stands up for the first time in weeks with your help and walks 4 steps to the wash basin and washes his own face. And the expression on it while he does this is something you don't have a word for in 17-year-old Somerset vocabulary. Griggs has gone back to the carpenter's crew. He went quietly without announcement. One morning just didn't appear at morning rounds, and when you checked his berth it was empty and made up, and the space held the shape of him for a few hours and then the ship absorbed it. Pierce is on crutches. A carpenter's mate made them from spare timber, following Mr. Dodd's measurements. They're rough, slightly uneven, but they work. Pierce took them without comment and spent the first day in the sick berth learning to balance, crashing twice into the bulkhead, ignoring this with the composure of a man who has decided that dignity is the one thing they will not take from him. The second day he went up to the gun deck. You heard about it later. He just appeared, on his crutches, leaning against the rail of the upper gun deck and looking out at the sea. Men moved around him. Nobody made it awkward. This is what the Navy, at its better, does. Absorbs what people are and finds them useful within it. Greenwich eventually, he'd said, when you asked him about it. Eventually, you agreed. But not yet. February. The weather eases slightly. Still cold, still grey, but the violence of November and December has moderated into something survivable. The sick berth settles into a rhythm that you can hold in both hands now, the whole shape of it familiar. You know where everything is. You know who needs what in what order. You know the sound of each patient's breathing and what a change in that sound might mean. You know which medicines are running low. You know when Mr. Dodd's silence means concern versus when it means he's thinking. You've become useful. Not trained. You're not a surgeon. You're nowhere close to a surgeon. But useful in the specific way of someone who has learned the right movements for a difficult space and can now do them without thinking. Freeing thinking for the things that need it. Mr. Dodd notices. He notices in the way he notices everything, without comment, but with an adjustment of how he treats you. He starts asking your opinion on things, small things, observable things, the colour of a wound, the rate of a fever's change, whether a patient's breathing has improved or declined since yesterday. He asks and he listens to your answer, and sometimes he nods and sometimes he says, "I disagree because," and then explains why. Which is the more useful response? He's teaching you. Still not calling it teaching. Just talking and asking and letting information accumulate the way it accumulates in a ship's hold, incrementally, without ceremony, until suddenly there's a weight to it. One morning in February after rounds, he stops you as you're leaving the dispensary. "Boy." "Sir, Tom." The use of your actual name is startling enough that you turn around. "You came on board at Chatham knowing nothing." "Yes, sir." "You know more now." "Yes, sir." He looks at you for a moment. His face is its usual map of everything that's happened to it. The missing fingers, the grey hair, the eyes that have seen 47 men die of preventable things and 11 of things they could have handled differently. "Dodd," he says. You stare at him. "My given name is Samuel," he says. "But people in the profession call me Dodd. You may call me Dodd." He turns back to his instruments. You stand in the doorway for a second. "Thank you," you say. "Dodd." He says, and that's all. The conversation is over, but something has changed in the boundaries of this space. Something has been acknowledged, and both of you know it. Late February, somewhere in the Bay of Biscay, heading back toward England. You're on night watch in the sick berth. Silas is sleeping, actually sleeping, not just resting his bones. The first time you've seen him sleep in weeks. Pierce is in his berth, quieter than he used to be, working something out in the privacy of his own head. The other patients breathe their various rhythms. The ship is quiet the way the ship gets quiet after midnight, the night watch above maintaining their existence in the minimum noise possible. The rest of the crew asleep. The lantern burns low. The hull speaks its constant low language. The bilge breathes. You sit on the three-legged stool and let yourself, for the first time in weeks, be still. You think about Dulverton, about the green hills and the heather and the sound of sheep. You think about your mother in Bridgewater and your sisters, who you've written to twice. Letters that went overboard at Gibraltar with some hope but no certainty of arrival. You think about the farm that's gone, about the life that was supposed to happen there and didn't. You're 17 years old and you've been a loblolly boy on a warship for 4 months, and you've held men while they had limbs taken off, and you've held other men's hands while they died, and you've made gruel every morning for men who are too sick to feed themselves, and you've been up in a November gale with your hands on support beams for a full night, and you've been in a battle and you've smelled what a battle produces. You've also watched a city of lemons change a man's gums. You've watched Mr. Dodd's hands find a wooden splinter in someone's shoulder with a sureness that comes from 30 years of practice. You've watched John Pierce learn to balance on a single leg and a pair of rough crutches and look out at the sea from the gun deck rail as though the sea owes him nothing, and he owes it nothing, and they're squared. You're not the boy who got off the wagon in Chatham. This isn't a realization that arrives all at once. It's been arriving in pieces every day, in the shape of what you knew yesterday versus what you know today. Small accumulations. Until now, in the quiet, you can see the whole of it. What you know that the body can endure more than you'd believe without breaking. Not because the body is invulnerable, Silas has shown you precisely how vulnerable it is, but because endurance is what bodies do when they're given no other option, and sometimes even when they are. You know that the difference between a good surgeon and a bad one is not technique. Primarily, though technique matters, it's the willingness to keep the patients in mind as people and not problems. To let that willingness cost you something. To let your hands shake when they should shake. You know that the sea is not the enemy. The sea is the condition, and you can be angry at conditions all you like. But anger at conditions doesn't change them, and it costs you the energy you need for working within them. You know that men, ordinary men, men from Derbyshire and Plymouth and Norfolk and Somerset, can do things in extremity that they wouldn't have imagined possible from the comfort of ordinary life. You've watched them do it. You've done it. And you know that caring about the people around you is not a weakness in this environment, not a liability. It is, in fact, the whole mechanism. It's the reason you stay the extra hour above decks. It's the reason your hands shake. It's the reason that when John Pierce said "good lad" in a rough voice, it landed somewhere important. The night passes. You do the things that need doing. The candle, the check of each patient, the small adjustments of blankets and positions that keep people from developing the pressure sores that come from lying too long in one spot. Small things, necessary things, the kind of things that no one will remember or record, but that make the difference between someone arriving in better shape than they left and someone arriving worse. Silas wakes briefly around 3. "Still here, boy?" he says. "Still here." "Good." He looks at the ceiling. "Good." He goes back to sleep. You stay on your stool. Outside the hull, the Bay of Biscay moves through its winter character. There are no stars visible tonight. There rarely are this time of year this far north, and the water is dark and cold and going about its business without reference to anyone on or in the ships it carries. In Dulverton right now it would be the middle of the night. Your mother would be asleep in your aunt's house in Bridgewater. Your sisters would be asleep. Somewhere in that village the church would be dark, and the farms would be dark, and the hills would be quiet under February stars, the same stars that are invisible from here. You think about that distance, not with sadness exactly, with a kind of amazed measurement, how far you've gone from what you were, how far there is still to go. England in March. The Resolute comes into Portsmouth on a Tuesday afternoon, the harbour busy with the traffic of a navy at war. Other ships, ferries, small craft going back and forth between the anchored vessels and the shore. The sick berth discharges its patients to the naval hospital on shore. Silas, 2 of the fever men, one of the post-battle wounded who hasn't yet recovered to the Navy's satisfaction. Pierce goes with them, on his crutches, moving steadily, not looking back at the ship as he goes. You help him to the boat. At the gangway he stops, turns, looks at you. "Greenwich," he says. "Greenwich," you say. He nods once. The way he nodded on the day he woke up, that single confirmation nod. Then he turns and goes down the gangway and into the shore boat, and you watch him go, and then you go back to your work, because the sick berth needs to be cleaned and re-provisioned before the Resolute takes on new patients and begins the whole thing over. Will finds you later in the dispensary, taking inventory of the medicine chest. "How long before we go out again?" you ask. 3 weeks, maybe 4. He leans against the doorway. "You're not leaving?" You hadn't thought about it. Not properly. In theory, in Taunton, when the recruiting sergeant talked about adventures, there was an implicit story where the adventure ended and you went home. You'd thought about the ending as something that would obviously present itself when it arrived, like a destination on a road. You look at the medicine chest, at the instruments in their places, the probes and the forceps and the tourniquet, at the log which you've been keeping, in which the names of 43 patients over 6 months are written in a handwriting that has gotten steadier as the months have passed. "I don't think so," you say. Will nods, not surprised. "Dodd will take you on proper," he says. "Not just loblolly. Surgeon's mate eventually, if you stay." "I know. It's a hard life. I know that too." He's quiet for a moment. "Why are you staying?" You think about it honestly. Not the answer you'd give someone who needed to be convinced, but the actual answer. Because I'm good at it, you say. And because it matters, you pause. And because I want to know more than I know right now, and this is the place where I learn it. Will looks at you for a moment. Right answer, he says. He pushes off the doorway and goes back to work. You go back to the inventory. The medicine chest needs 2 bottles of laudanum replaced. The tourniquet has wear on the buckle that should be addressed before the next voyage. The surgical instruments need 1 more cleaning and oil. You start a list. 3 weeks later, in April, you go out again. New patients in the sick berth on departure. A different set of faces, different histories, different wounds already in various stages. A cook's assistant with a burned hand. 2 men from the pressed gang intake who are sick with something they brought with them from wherever the press found them. An older sailor with a bad knee that's gotten worse. You start the morning rounds at 5 o'clock, in the dark, with the cold of the orlop on your hands and the lantern swinging from its hook, and the smell of the sick berth doing what the sick berth smell does. You check each patient. You note what's changed overnight. You prepare the morning loblolly. You've been doing this for 4 months. You'll be doing it for years more, probably. Long enough to know it properly. Long enough to be eventually the kind of surgeon's mate who teaches loblolly boys what they need to know for the work ahead. Dodd is already in the dispensary when you arrive, which is unusual. He's not typically early. He's reading something, a pamphlet of some kind, in the lamplight. Something interesting, you ask? He looks up. Linda's published. James Lind, in Edinburgh. Clinical trials on scurvy, citrus fruit. He's proved it, methodologically. He looks at the pamphlet. He's proved what we already knew, and the Navy still won't act on it immediately, because the Navy moves at the speed of institutional change, which is to say, eventually. He says eventually in a specific tone. The tone of a man who has been saying eventually for years and intends to keep saying it until eventually is now. But he's proved it, you say. He's proved it. A moment. Good, you say. Yes, he says. Good. He goes back to reading. You go back to rounds. The ship moves beneath your feet. The long familiar roll of open water. The harbour gone. The sea ahead. Through the hull you can hear the water, dark and cold and going on forever, and the sound of the Resolute going out to meet it again. It's night now. Not tonight, not this specific night, but the nights, all of them, adding up. The cumulative weight of all the nights in the orlop that have become, gradually and without your full permission, the texture of your ordinary life. Your hammock is familiar now in the specific way that uncomfortable things become familiar. You know where its weight sits. You know the particular angle the rope makes on the left side where the hook is slightly lower than it should be. You know the creak it makes when you first get in versus the creak it makes when you've been in it long enough that the ropes have warmed and settled. The cold is constant. You've stopped fighting it. You have your coat, your blanket, the animal warmth of 14 men sleeping within 15 feet. It's enough. It's exactly enough, and not more. Outside, the sea is doing what the sea does, heaving in long, slow swells, the hull working its low creak, the rigging above in the dark, the night watch on deck, the helmsman at the wheel, the lookout in the bow, all of it continuing, all of it working, the great machinery of the ship sustaining itself through the dark while most of the people inside it sleep. You've learned to sleep in it. 6 months ago you couldn't. Now you drop into sleep the way you drop into familiar water, without resistance, because resistance costs what sleep was supposed to restore. Your mind, on the edge of it, goes through the day. Morning rounds, the burned cook's assistant's hand is healing clean, which is the best outcome and not always the one you get. The pressed men's fever is breaking in one and holding in the other, which is not yet decided. The old sailor's knee is what it is, what it's been, a slow, declining negotiation between his body and 30 years of sea service. Small things, daily things, the things that constitute the actual work of keeping people alive in a place that has no particular interest in their survival. You're good at this. You didn't know you'd be good at this. You didn't know this was something you could be good at. Didn't know it existed as a category of thing until you were in it. But here is a thing that is true. Some people find their work by choosing it, and some people find it by being dropped into it and discovering that they can do it, that they even, quietly, without making a speech about it, want to do it. You're the second kind. Somewhere on this ship, John Pierce's replacement as the senior topman is sleeping in the forecastle, easy with emotion, 40 feet of rigging between him and the deck at all times in bad weather. Somewhere on the gun deck, the men who serve the 32-pounders are sleeping in hammocks strung between the guns. Somewhere above them, the officers have their cabins and their slightly better food, and their somewhat greater certainty about what tomorrow looks like. And here you are on the orlop, 2 feet above the bilge, with the sick berth 7 feet aft and Dodd's medicine chest locked, and the morning rounds at 5, and the loblolly to carry, and the dressings to change, and the names to record in the log. This is what you've become. This is what you are in this moment, in this hammock, in this ship, in this sea. The sounds of the Resolute settle around you like water settling into a shape. The creak of the hull, the swell beneath, the far above sound of the night watch, faint as something half remembered. The breathing of the men around you, each one a rhythm you know. Midshipman Richards, who still dreams of his mother. McCrae from the gun crew, who sleeps quiet and still as a held breath. Will, who sleeps quickly and efficiently as he does everything else. You stop sorting through the sounds. Let them be one sound instead of many. The sea. All of it, finally, is the sea. The hull and the rigging and the breathing and the creak. The sea underneath all of it. Holding all of it up, indifferent and total. You've been afraid of it. You were afraid of it in Chatham, watching the ship from the dock, thinking about what 6 inches of oak between you and 40 miles of depth actually means. You were afraid of it in November in the gale, holding the support beam while the hull worked and the storm pressed. You were afraid in a different way in the battle, the sounds coming through the hull with no visual, no horizon, just the pressure of it arriving through wood and air. And now you're not afraid of it in the same way. You're not unafraid. But the quality of it has changed, the way the quality of everything changes when you've been with it long enough to know it, rather than just fear it. The sea is not trying to kill you. The sea is the sea. You're the one who came onto it. You can rage against its indifference, or you can learn the terms and operate within them, and the only productive version of this is the second one. 40 years Silas has been on it. 12 years, Pierce. The watermen in London, the ones Thomas Lynn knew, they go out on the river every day. They read it. They know its moods. They say, not through the arches on a flood tide, not because the river is cruel, but because those are the terms. You're learning the terms. Your eyes are heavy now. The body has made its decision. You let yourself float down towards sleep the way the Resolute floats on the swells, not fighting it, using it, letting the motion carry you where it goes. You think about tomorrow. Tomorrow at 5, the cold planking, the coat, the lantern, the sick berth in the darkness. Silas. No, Silas is in Portsmouth now, in the hospital, eating proper food and sitting in the sun on days when there's sun, which there sometimes is even in March. You hope he's sitting in the sun. The new patients. Different names, same work. The daily practice of keeping people alive one day more than they'd have managed without you. It's not glamorous. It doesn't appear in the dispatches that the Admiralty sends to London. No one will write a ballad about the loblolly boy. No one will hang your portrait in the naval hospital. But John Pierce shook your hand before surgery, and the burned cook's assistant's hand is healing clean, and an old man in Portsmouth is maybe, just maybe, sitting in whatever March sunshine is available, with gums that have stopped bleeding. That's what you have. That's what you are. For now, that's enough. Let the ship carry you. Let the sea, with its absolute indifference and its absolute sufficiency, do what the sea does. Let the sounds work through you rather than past you. The creak of the hull, the deep slow breath of the bilge, the rhythm of the men sleeping around you, the distant song of the rigging above, the wind finding the ropes in the dark. Let your thoughts slow now. The day's inventory, the medicine chest, the names in the log, the morning rounds at 5, let them all lose their sharp edges and become something softer, something that can wait. You're warm enough, fed enough. You're 17 years old on a Royal Navy ship somewhere in open water, and you know things now that you didn't know before, and tomorrow you will know more, and the knowing accumulates in you quietly the way the sea accumulates under the hull, deeper than it looks, holding more weight than you'd believe. That's enough for tonight. That's more than enough. Let the dark come in. Let sleep take you the way the sea takes the sound of a dropped anchor, fast and complete, absorbed into something larger. The sounds are going now, not gone, just going further. The hull, the water, the breathing, all of it settling, all of it quieting. Centuries from now there will be ships in these same waters, different ships. Ships made of steel, ships that carry hundreds of people in warmth and light, ships where no one shares a bed in a cold orlop 2 feet above the bilge. The scurvy will be conquered. The amputation will be done with the patient asleep. The fever will be treated with things that work. But somewhere in those ships, in whatever their equivalent of the sick berth is, there will be people doing the same work, tending, carrying, staying the extra hour, letting their hands shake when the hands need to shake. The sea will be the same sea, and the need to be useful to the people around you, to do the thing that needs doing without ceremony at 5 in the morning with cold hands, that doesn't change. That won't change. In some form or another, that has always been there and will always be. So rest. You've done the work today that you are here to do. The Resolute holds you. The sea holds the Resolute. And out there in the dark, the horizon, the stars when the clouds allow it, the same stars that were there before any of this, that will be there long after, steady, go under. Good night.